Hey, it's James Mulvaney here, and we are back for season number 2 of Create, Reach, Inspire. Now today, my guest is Nick Horrocks, who's founder of X0 Advisory, and he's here to discuss everything from how to raise money as a startup through to how to build strong relationships with investors. And he's also using podcasting as a marketing and business development tool to launch his boutique corporate finance practice, so we explored that as well. All of that and more coming up on today's episode of Create, Reach, Inspire. All right, so today my guest is Nick from X0 Advisory. How's it going, Nick? Thanks for coming along.
Well, it's an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much for inviting me along. Good morning.
So I'm excited to talk about a lot of things today. The F word being finance, and also the fact that you've used podcasting, which we'll get to in a little bit later, to launch your consultancy. I guess to start off with, you've worked in corporate finance for a long time, various different capacities, different kind of companies of different sizes. So just start off by just telling us about your background and how you got into corporate finance.
Certainly, well, to be honest, I went straight into corporate finance on graduation. I went to work down in the city in London, and I did probably ultimately going on for 10 years down in the city in London. But I'm from Manchester originally, and I'd actually spent a small amount of that time in Manchester anyway. And it was always thought it was a great place to do business. I've got family up here. I had no long-term plans to remain in London. So when the time was right and the opportunity was right, I made the move back up here, which was in 2006. And to be perfectly honest, haven't looked back from that point of view. I moved from what I would call being more big company corporate finance PLC work to much more private company work, which I much prefer personally, because you tend to be dealing with sort of entrepreneurs and founders, and actually the journey that you go on with them is really quite exciting, sometimes quite emotional, and I've always really enjoyed that side of things. And then ultimately I found myself focusing more and more within the tech sector. And that led to me working and heading up the northern office for a firm called GP Bullhound, which is arguably the largest tech-only investment bank in Europe. But I then decided at the beginning of this year, for various personal reasons, but also because in particular I saw an opportunity where companies at the smaller scale, looking to raise up to £5 million, were not being serviced by the corporate finance community. And I felt that there was a model and there is a market for those services. The model has to be that you have to keep your overheads fairly low, which meant obviously setting up on my own, or at least being a very small company. But also the fact that I had spent a huge part of my career building connections within that market, and was fairly confident that I could make a go of it.
Yeah, and what's it like kind of taking that leap from being in a corporate world to something that's very different and sort of founding a boutique finance practice?
Well, it's certainly scary, and you do occasionally wake up and think, Christ, why on earth did I do this? Or there must be easier ways to go about trying to make a living, I should say.
Is it part of the fact that I guess you've seen a lot of people doing it themselves, working with tech companies and founders and entrepreneurs, and you kind of think, you sort of see that side of things and think, oh, that looks interesting. Is that part of why you sort of did this? Well,
I mean, I've done that basically for the last few years anyway. So the skill set is entirely transferable from what I was doing previously on a what I would call a day-to-day corporate finance role. Where it gets scary is when you've got to set up your own IT, and you've got you don't have a PA and you don't have an office, and if the computer goes down, then that's you've got to sort that and nobody else. And it's all those little things that you really take for granted in a large organisation.
Yeah, right. I see what you mean.
Plus, of course, you have colleagues to bounce ideas off, and that clearly doesn't exist. It's me and the cat at home, and in reality, she's pretty useless. So I've kind of got to make my own meetings, develop my own conversations, develop my own narrative within the sector, which is, I'm sure we'll come on to it, was exactly why I came up with the concept of podcasts.
Okay, so I guess what excites you most about your new venture? What do you think the challenges might be over the next year, and sort of what do you think is most exciting about the industry at the moment?
Well, I think there is a big tech boom, hopefully not a bubble actually, that may arguably some valuations have got a bit racy, but I'm not really seeing that. But I think especially where we are here in Manchester, there's a huge pool of talent. There's plenty of money around. There's good ideas around. It is relatively speaking, certainly compared to the likes of London and the southeast more generally, a much cheaper place to do business.
It's a cheaper place to live. It's, you get better quality of lifestyle, etc.
Absolutely. Yeah. There's many pluses. The infrastructure is far better. Yeah. The airport's 10 minutes away and not 45 minutes away, all sorts of little things which actually add up to make it a really, really good place to found a business.
I agree. I mean, as a founder in Manchester myself, I think it's interesting. I've never thought about the airport thing, but you've got a very good point there. I went over to Amsterdam and back in a single day not so long ago to speak to a partner over there, and that's the first time I've ever done a trip there and back in a day, but it was quite doable, really.
Yeah,
you can be in Amsterdam just as quick as you could be in London, basically. From the city centre at door to door. And also what's very exciting I think about Manchester alone is just the amount of development that's going on. There's cranes everywhere all over the city centre.
The crane count is I've been here quite a while now. I've never seen more cranes than I have now, which I only view as positive at the moment.
I think it's interesting because so many people I kind of noticed that. You can't help but notice it, but it's a good measure of how our city's doing and what's coming next.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a big supporter and believer in the north, generally, because that's where my business is based. But I am obviously more specifically based in Manchester, and I'm certainly seeing huge opportunities in Manchester, one way or another.
All right, so let's move on and talk about the F word, which is finance.
Yep.
Which when you arrived earlier, you said, "What does the F word? What's that?" So I think this is one of these things that I actually don't know a lot about. I've been very lucky; I've never had to raise investment, but I know every startup needs cash, right?
Yep.
That's for sure. Sometimes startups burn through it like nobody's business. Other times people are more frugal, and sometimes startups focus. I mean, this is what we've always done: is focus on making profit and being profit centric from the beginning, and making sure we've got revenue coming in rather than sort of spending loads of money and then thinking about revenue 3 years down the line.
Sure.
So, I guess to start off with, give me sort of a few common mistakes, maybe 5 common mistakes that founders make when they're trying to raise capital.
Well, I think the first thing is to think that it's easy and that it's not going to take a long time and you've not got to put a lot of shoe leather down.
Right.
And I think, people think, I can do it in a couple of months. Probably not. So I think that's the first thing. The second thing is actually to find the right investors. There's such a thing as dumb money and there's intelligent money.
Right.
And actually, if you're going to find money at an early stage, try and get people that really understand your business model. People or institutions, I should say.
Yeah.
That know where you want to go. That can bring value, some of their own expertise to the board table, and don't be afraid to bring that on board.
What would you say to a founder who thought the opposite? Well, it's money's money. I know what I'm doing. It doesn't really matter where it comes from.
Well, if you think that and you can do it, then fair enough. I have never met a company where when they've brought on the right person, sometimes they bring in the wrong people, they've not gone, this guy's just absolutely changed the way I think about my business. And what they'll find is that they'll sit around the board table, or it's not even around the board table, they can have a call at 10 o'clock at night with this guy. And he'll go, why on earth are you doing this? When I ran my business, we never did that. Don't do that, do this. And I've heard people say, well, actually, one conversation with these guys cut out 15 mistakes and probably 6 months of development. Now, that's worth an awful lot.
So it's basically like having a kind of free non-exec in a sense.
Well, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
They're obviously totally aligned to you because they want to make money.
Yeah.
And they certainly don't want you to see you make mistakes that are avoidable or that they might have made. So you get the benefit of their wisdom. So if you get that right, then I think you're onto a winner. Now that's not to say that people don't have the wrong people on board. They do. And sometimes it's the dumb money that causes the real problems. And I think that probably comes on to the third thing, which is worth mentioning, is actually how you structure that.
Right.
So, realistically, you should be saying, look, it's equity into the business. We're aligned. It's risk capital. Sometimes people say, well, I'll put 500,000 in, or let's say 500,000, but it's a loan, and then I want some equity on top of that, and then that causes problems because obviously it's got a priority. It maybe even it has a payback date. It might be paying interest at a time when actually the business doesn't want to be paying out cash. But of course, then you get to the next funding round, and someone says, "Well, I want to put £5 million in, but why? I'm the latest investor. Why should my money rank behind a loan that a guy's put in?" So then you start having those kind of debates. So you've got to get the structure of that money right as well, which is very important.
And what's the best approach if you're starting from cold and you're thinking, I've got a great idea for a business, I need to go and raise some money. What do I do? What would you say? What would your advice be in that situation?
Well, so when you say you've got a great idea, that's actually you need to put a credible business plan together. That's a financial model. That's how that builds up, what the story is, what the market opportunity is. And then, to be honest, I would talk to as many people as you possibly can. Go to events, network like hell, meet as many people as you possibly can. Through those conversations, you will start to meet people who will be interested in investing one way or another.
And I'd also say as well, my perspective on that is because people come up to me all the time and say, I've got a great idea. It used to be, I've got a great idea for an app. Now people are saying, I've got a great idea for a podcast, or I've got a good idea for a website or whatever. But I think speaking to other startup founders who have been through that process as well, is really useful.
I think as many people, network the hell out of things, because the more people you can meet, frankly, the better. The more chance you get to actually stand up and maybe present in front of people you don't know at hackathons or whatever it might be. Go for it. Take that opportunity, because somebody somewhere will give you some feedback.
One of the best things when we launched Radio.co in 2015, a year later we entered a pitch competition, and that was really good because it was hard to quantify exactly what we got out of it, but my goodness, it was good networking, and the events and things that we went to, because we were one of the winners, it just opened up loads of interesting opportunities. I met loads of interesting people in the process, and I think that was really useful in the early days.
I think what you've got to remember is that there are people out there looking to invest in early stage businesses, but you've got to go and find them. If you've not even got the initiative to go and find them, and they should be fairly visible, you're not going to have the initiative to run and develop a business in a tough market.
What do you think about sort of angel investment?
Well, that's typically where it comes from, one way or another. Now angel investment is everywhere from friends and family through to more established angel networks, and you will typically find those angels, which are you can call them high net worths, whatever you want to call them. As I say, there's dumb money, there's intelligent angels. It's finding the right people. You'd like to think that an angel per se is more than just money, but brings a level of expertise with them as well. It
goes back to what you said earlier as well. The fact that you can get on the phone, you can maybe have them in once a quarter, looking at your progress and offering advice. What do you do if you run out of cash as a startup?
Well, if you run out of cash, frankly, that's the end of the business, to crudely put. What you shouldn't be doing is running out of cash.
Right.
And I say this to every business that I work with. They have a runway as to when they think they will be running out of cash. And actually, you want to be working that you've got, in the next round of cash in, a good 6 months before you're forecast to be running out of money. The reason being, actually, is the closer you get to running out of money, the more the control and the strength in that negotiation is with the investor than it is with you. If they know you're going to run out of money tomorrow, the terms are going to be slightly tougher than if you've got 6 months and you're speaking to three, 4 people. So, one of the golden rules, as we used to call it, ABC, or always be closing, is always be thinking about the next funding round. When is it going to be? Where's it going to come from? How big is it going to be? When am I going to need it? Be ready. Have that management presentation, that deck ready, carry it around with you, have it on your laptop, so that if you are in London for a day, but you've got an afternoon free, go and see 2 or 3 people who may have approached you in the past, or you may have spoken to in the past, and update them on where you are. Because actually what investors like is a bit of advance warning of when a deal might be coming up. But equally, they're like to know, I met this guy 6 months ago. He wasn't fundraising, but he said he had a couple of milestones he was going to hit. Hopefully he'll come back. If you then go back to him in 3-4 months' time and say, right, I've hit all those milestones, I'm now ready for my next funding round. He knows about you. It's much easier, therefore, to get through the door, and you've done what you said you're going to do.
Again, I think that's really good advice. I think it goes back to what you were saying earlier about meeting as many people as possible. And if you're chatting to an investor in, you're very, very early stage, maybe you've not got a team yet, or you're kind of thinking about an idea, but you meet someone who kind of seems interested, but maybe it's not right for them at the time. Yeah. Make sure that you follow up with that person in a year or 2 years' time.
Absolutely.
Because they'll remember you and they'll go back.
And, from their point of view, investors, they're absolute gold dust. Really, what they value more than anything is pipeline and origination, and having an advanced look at something. So if they've met you, and they'll be perfectly honest, say, not for us now, but please stay in touch, great, give them a ring in a year's time. Even they still might not be ready and say, look, thought I'd just update you, was probably still not ready, but why don't I'm in London, or in Manchester, or whatever it is, maybe I'll just come and have a quick chat and update you.
And you said when you carry around a presentation on your laptop, what advice would you give people who are putting that together? What are the main things you need to convey in that deck?
Well, quite a lot, actually. So a real understanding of the product and the market.
Right.
What the value is of your product, and how it's differentiated. Because in reality, it might not be that differentiated, but I guess you've got to convince people that it is.
Yeah.
I think at an earlier stage, you've got to talk about people as well. I think, if you can say, well, I've now recruited, this CTO, this sales and marketing person, I've got a finance guy on board, that's all positive. That suddenly goes from being an idea on a piece of paper to a business with people.
A team that can make it happen.
Yeah, and ultimately, investors back people. They don't back businesses.
Right.
And that's a really key thing to for people to remember.
So is it important to get your personality across in that deck as well as just
absolutely.
Graphs and pie charts?
Yeah, so you've got to be able to talk knowledgeably about where you are.
Yeah.
I mean, you've got to be able to present yourself. There's no doubt about it.
Hey, if you're enjoying this episode and perhaps you want to find out what's going on behind the scenes here at Create, Reach, Inspire HQ, then please go and check me out on Instagram. It's at Create, Reach, Inspire, posting lots of behind-the-scenes clips of making this podcast, but also lots of additional content as well about running and scaling businesses, marketing, and generally my digital life. So you can go and check me out over on Instagram. It's at Create, Reach, Inspire. And if you want to connect with me on LinkedIn, I'm on there as well. Just search for my name, James Mulvaney. All right, having said that, let's get back to the episode. Okay, so you've been using podcasting as part of your marketing strategy for X.0. First of all, when did you launch the business?
So I formally launched in June.
Yeah.
But when I launched, I had done the podcast prior to that.
Well, all of the
I'd done
all of series one.
I'd done 22 podcasts prior to that.
Wow. How long did that take?
I probably did them over the course of 2 to 3 months.
Right. Okay.
And it was very deliberate to do the podcasts as a marketing tool. I was conscious that I was going to launch a business. I didn't just want to be a business card. I was very specifically focusing on technology, digital businesses. I was very specifically focusing on in the north. And I'm also a great believer when you're in business, especially a business like mine, you've got to give something to people before they'll open up. And they've, whether it's a bit of information about valuation or a bit of information about markets or deals that have been done or something, they go, oh, that's really interesting. Wow, these guys kind of know what they're talking
Delivering
about.
Delivering value.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, you've got to, And so I thought, well, how am I going to as a business which doesn't have a deal track record, fundamentally what I'm about is raising money for people, doing deals, and that's raising money or M&A, selling businesses. So I've got a huge history of doing these things, but they don't belong to me, they belong to my previous employers, which is fair enough. But I built up a network whilst I've been doing those. How do I tell the world, or at the very least Manchester or the North, that I know about digital, that I am networked within the community, and that actually I know what I'm talking about? And I felt the way to do that was to interview tech entrepreneurs who are ultimately going to be my clients, to be able to hear their story, which is why I called it My Digital Journey, about how the challenges that they face from starting a business, growing a business, recruiting, the challenges that digital had on certain industries, and how they've adapted their business models to reflect those, selling businesses. And the idea was to create something that anybody could listen to in 20 minutes on the train and go, right, it was really interesting to hear that guy's story, and wow, there were 3 or 4 things that came out of that about, recruiting people or selling a business that I'll take away from me. And actually, I can give Nick a ring because clearly he knows what he's talking about.
And why did you choose, what appealed to you as podcasting as the medium?
Because I think it is the one that can be consumed in the most simple way. So you can listen to it while you're driving, you can listen to it on the train. It's downloadable without being, taking up huge amounts of memory. You can tailor it, you can edit it, and it's relatively simple and cheap to produce and edit. People find it. You can listen to it while you're running, whatever it is.
Passively consume it, basically.
Yes, exactly.
I think that's the difference between audio and video. Is that with video you've got to be paying attention, and it's kind of easy to miss.
I listen to far more radio on podcasts than I do consume video. Whether it's television or YouTube or whatever it might be. And actually, I think it's because you're not being necessarily bombarded with information, both visual and audio, I tend to find you take on more information.
Right, okay, interesting. Yeah, I think I probably agree with that.
And actually, good people communicating on the radio, they make clear points. And there's 3 or 4 things that you can just take away with you. And I find it a far more satisfying and relaxing medium to absorb and enjoy and learn from than I necessarily do video.
How about actually producing it? Do you enjoy it's funny because when we first sat down here, so it's interesting, I'm sat on the other side of the bench almost, you've kind of interviewed lots of people, and I said, well, come in and talk about your process and why you chose this as a medium. But do you find it kind of like, I think it's quite a natural way of speaking to someone. It's just like you're having a conversation.
Absolutely.
Oldest form of communication.
So you've got to bear in mind it's a relatively cheap way of getting some content as well. I was very fortunate. I worked with a business called Story Publishing as a husband and wife team. He was a journalist, business journalist who I knew. She was an ex-BBC radio producer, etc. And she literally came along with her microphones, which are very, very similar to these, and a recording box, and her headphones. And the nice thing about it was, that all goes in a backpack. We could turn up at people's houses, where the vast majority of them were done.
Interesting, right?
We could be set up within 5 minutes. The person themselves didn't have to leave the house.
They feel relaxed.
They're totally relaxed. They don't have to, get themselves dolled up, or we don't have any lighting or anything to worry about like that. But this is fine. But this is the next step. Absolutely. So people, it's like, can you spare 45 minutes? We'll come round to your house. All you've got to do. I would send through, these are the areas we're going to talk about. It's literally, we'll be there maximum an hour. We're generally there a bit less. And the other thing is, actually, entrepreneurs like to talk about what they've done. They like to share, actually, their experiences.
It's the importance of storytelling.
And absolutely. And I think they're actually quite grateful for saying, well, thank you very much for inviting me to tell my story. And it's like, well, okay, fine. To my mind, they've done me a massive favour, but actually they're equally grateful. Now, I've therefore I felt I had a responsibility to produce it well and put them in a good light. Of course. And obviously, quite legitimately, it's an opportunity for them to promote what they're doing, and I was totally cool with that. And so therefore, they had to sound intelligent. I had to sound not flippant or anything like that. And equally, the product.
I'm sure they are intelligent.
But well, they are. They are very intelligent. But I had to I couldn't be asking silly questions.
Yeah. I know, and I think also. But I think you don't need to. The questions you can ask entrepreneurs, I think, can be the same but have very different answers. Oh yeah, absolutely. And that was the really interesting thing. So a lot of the questions were, what's your biggest mistake? Yeah.
What have you learnt most from being an entrepreneur? What advice would you give to people starting up as an entrepreneur? And that would tend to be at the end. But equally, depending on where their industry was. So we interviewed people who were in medical research, who were using data and data analytics to take that information and draw conclusions quicker. That's how digital is impacting a certain industry. So that's got a relevance to certain people. Mm-hmm. Interviewed a business development director at ITV. There's a really challenging digital environment. What do you do when linear TV's kind of collapsing in on itself? How do you remain relevant? And a big beast like ITV, how do you remain relevant?
A lot of responsibility there as well.
Huge responsibility. And very, very close relationships and a lot of stakeholders and all sorts of things, including government and legislation and regulatory stuff that they've got to be mindful of as well. So, they face very different challenges. To hear their challenges was very interesting, and that will have relevance to certain other people who will listen to it. And then I deliberately wanted to have some left field voices. Mm-hmm. So, and actually, I'll say this now because I now have the data. The most listened to podcast was actually a guy called Alistair Humphreys, who's a professional adventurer.
Right. Okay.
And he probably spends
kind of like Bear Grylls type character.
Yeah, very much like Bear Grylls.
Okay, interesting.
And he spends, a period of the year doing really crazy stuff, adventures, and walking to the Antarctic, walking across deserts, whatever it is. But the rest of the time, he's promoting that through social media. He's speaking, he's writing books. But a huge proportion of actually his livelihood depends on his engagement with social media. So, that's a bizarre world now that someone like an adventurer or like Alistair who can make a living as an adventurer, but actually that living is dependent upon his interaction digitally, and he goes and sits in a hut and he communicates with the world that way.
I think that's how social media and digital and podcasting and all these kind of things have changed the world in a sense, because I think it would have been difficult to make a living doing that in the 90s unless you were very lucky and got on TV.
As a bit of an aside, I listened to Ranulph Fiennes once, who's clearly an amazing adventurer, and he said the most important person in any adventurer's life is his book editor. Now that was probably an old school view, because he'd say, right, I'm going to do the Northwest Passage, and his book editor will say, there's probably a book in that, go and do it. And that probably funded it ultimately. Whereas Alistair does write books, but actually his engagement is through social media one way or another. So it's a totally different way of engaging and pursuing a hobby and a lifestyle.
Powerful brand building.
About a personal brand, which is, and the guy's an adventurer.
And what's your approach to booking guests? Have you said obviously quite a few of the people you spoke to you already knew. Was there people you didn't know, or? Yeah,
so the vast majority I knew. And actually, what was interesting is I set out with a challenge. I said, I'm going to target 30. Right. But if I get to 20, I'll be delighted. And in the end, I got to 22. And I actually thought by that stage, I'd probably done enough. And actually, there's an awful lot of content there. I could have probably done a few more if I wanted to. And I may, having done it now, I may revisit it again in 6 months' time. Well, I was going to say,
is there going to be season 2? Is there a plan?
There might well be, But I think I will, there's all sorts of ways I can spin this, actually, because there's people I know have, since I've done the podcast, have done amazing things. So it's a follow-up from that. So there's a great, stage 2 to the story. There's equally, looking at, different industries.
Yeah.
Plenty of people who have come out of the woodwork as a result of these podcasts and said, "Oh, it's been really interesting. Can we have a conversation?" I go, "Actually, that's a very interesting business. I'd love to have a conversation with you as well." So it's developing, and I really need to think. It would probably be maybe more thematic, so I might do 6 on a certain theme.
Okay. And then what advice would you give to someone who is looking at using podcasting to launch a business, and also how did you approach the format and etc.?
So I think, well, first of all, I think you've got to think, actually, what do I want them to be about? What do I want my listeners, whoever they might be, who am I going to market them to, whether it's through LinkedIn or social media or however it is, are they going to be interested? What do I want it to be about? It can't just be about a conversation with a couple of mates. So mine was very much about my digital journey, and I had a very clear view about speaking to tech entrepreneurs about how they built, grown, developed their businesses. So have a theme. Then I think you've got to identify the people you want to speak to within that, and that was very much me reaching out to my network to have those conversations. And then from a technological point of view, I think, I was very lucky to find Story Publishing, who were journalists and technologically savvy. So they were able to listen to the podcast as it was being done. If something didn't come out quite right, or there was crap sound in the background, and on one, actually, I had I think it was a sort of gospel choir started practicing in the background,
right?
So which was actually but fortunately, because we had enough technology and the skills, or I didn't, that you wouldn't know.
Was the gospel choir on the next door house? Or
well, it was. I interviewed one of the. Actually, to be fair, I think it is actually mentioned on the podcast. It was Alistair Humphreys, the explorer. I saw him at the NEC because that's where he was speaking, and he was speaking at a sort of trade event, I think for QuickFit, for all their, managers or something. And suddenly, he was one of the speakers, but also they were having a gospel choir. So just as I was interviewing him, the gospel choir turned up to practice. So
treat it like backing music.
But fortunately, I had someone that was technically able enough now to be able to edit that out. And I guess appropriate technology and mics and all that good stuff. So, and at the time I was sort of thinking, do I want to spend this type of money on doing it? Thank God I did,
right?
Because it sounded professional.
Yes.
And actually, the worst thing would have been if they'd sounded crap, poor sound, poorly edited, all the things that I can't do. People would go, "Oh, this is just a guy."
I think that's the thing.
Around.
I think gone are the days of 2 guys down a pub just having a laugh, and that used to be a podcast and recording it on some on your iPhone or something. I think especially if you're doing it as part of a brand exercise, I think you need to make sure the results are at least a certain caliber.
So what I will say is that there were a couple that I did on my own. I literally just took a professional handheld recorder,
like a Zoom,
digital, something like that. But then I handed it back to the producers who edited it. And they put a bit of music on the beginning, and the whole thing sounded like a product rather than something that had been thrown together as a university project or something. So I think those are the sort of things to think about. So think about your audience. Think about what you're going to say. Think about who you're going to speak to, what you're going to say to them. So just in the actual process, once they said they were happy to do it, it was literally a case of, look, these are the sort of things that I'm going to run through. I was very careful to make sure that they didn't have to do any preparation. It was a conversation. They felt totally relaxed. There was no sense that that there was something kind of anything other than it being a conversation.
Like an awkward BBC sort of news interview or something. You don't want it to be.
I said, as far as I'm concerned, you've got an interesting story. I just want to hear about it. I'm going to ask you questions about it. Anything you're not comfortable saying, we can edit out. And feel free to talk about what you're doing at the moment and why that's important and why you've ended up where you are. and actually, as I say, people were really grateful for that. And on a number of occasions, people actually said, well, why don't you go and speak to this person?
Right, okay.
And that probably on 3 or 4 occasions, people said, oh, I really enjoyed that, go and speak to this. And they also came on the podcast. Now, the other thing that...
So it was good in terms of business development from that perspective.
Oh, yeah, it was hugely good. Great. It was fantastic. As a piece of basic networking for me, it was brilliant. And then So the other thing that I was very keen to do and was really supported both by the guys that were producing for me and who were or at least half of them were ex-BBC, and also my marketing agency was said, you need a diversity of voices. And which is, thank God they said that, actually, because tech has an appearance of being largely white and male. So I was able to
probably just finance, I guess.
Absolutely. And so I was very keen to get a lot of female voices, certainly a lot of female, and I'm delighted. And actually, what was very interesting is that a lot of those female voices had been quite reticent about speaking up about what they were doing, and in some ways they'd never done anything like this before. And they were really quite grateful for the opportunity of having done it and being promoted. And they were all brilliant, actually. They were all absolutely fantastic and had, in many ways, the most interesting stories. Because, people think about tech as being loads of geeky guys, but actually there were these fantastic women that are telling stories in technology which were really different and really inspiring.
Okay, cool. So just to wrap things up, what would you say have the benefits have been of running a podcast? Have you kind of clearly noticed that, we've had inquiries because of it?
So I think from my point of view, I've had something proper every week that I've had them. So I launched with 6 and then I released 1 a week thereafter. I've had something to promote every week on social media and on my website, which is great. It's proper content. It's not me just sort of playing around on social media and making a few comments. Something, and actually, then when I put it online, the people who have done the interview, or done the podcast rather, they promote it amongst their own network. So that goes out a lot wider. I've had people go, we absolutely love this, we've never done anything like this before, can we send it out, put it on our website, do all sorts of things, re-promote it in various small bits? I'm delighted, of course you can. It's your product as much as mine, just so long as, frankly, if you promote it, just put X.0 in there. And I'm absolutely delighted. So from a promotional point of view, it's had the network effect. I think to be able to talk, if I'm speaking to people who perhaps haven't seen for a while or not met before, and say, actually, one of the things I've done is this series of podcasts about technology. And interesting, you're at a case where you should listen to these 2 or 3 podcasts of people I've spoken to, because actually their story's got a lot of relevance for you. They say, oh, go, right, that lends me a huge air of credibility.
Of course.
And frankly, people have just come up to me and said, wow, what an interesting thing to have done. People that I used to work with, former colleagues, all sorts of things, have said, I'm not quite sure why we didn't think of that. What a really good thing to have done. And I say it's relatively quick, simple, cheap. Nobody has come to me and said, I wish I hadn't done that at all. It's cost me, no one's charged me to interview them. It's cost me a bit to produce them. I've actually got a product there which I am really happy with, which will stand the test of time, which I can re-release. I can still do, there's still plenty of mileage in it.
And you probably wouldn't have had the chance to do this because you stayed working in the corporate world.
And it was interesting because I was thinking last year that this would have been a really interesting thing to do for our business, and for all sorts of reasons. They spend their marketing budget how they do.
Yes.
But actually, I saw this. People have very interesting stories, and actually, the nice thing about a lot of entrepreneurs is, they tend to want to share them. They tend to like talking. For 45 minutes, you come to their office and they tell you how great they've been, how lucky they are, and pass on a bit of advice. And they're genuinely quite grateful about doing it. My responsibility, therefore, is to promote it right, to make sure it's a professional product, so that they don't sound cheap or foolish or anything like that, and that it's been really beneficial.
Cool. All right. Well, thanks very much for your time, Nick.
It's a pleasure.
Thanks very much for your time,
It's a
Nick.
pleasure. Absolute pleasure
Great
to come
interview.
in.
Really interesting. And
Well, best of luck with your business.
Yeah, thank you.
Which, as you know, I'm a big supporter of podcasts,
Yes,
so
yeah.
I think you've got a great future.
So thanks for listening to this week's episode. To get the latest episode directly to your favourite podcast app, please remember to subscribe to the podcast. Just search for it on Spotify or Apple Music. We're on all of the major podcast platforms and apps. Did you know you can also follow me on Instagram at Create Reach Inspire for lots of latest information and tips and tricks, plus also behind the scenes content of making this podcast. Thanks for listening to today's episode. Please remember to hit that like button and write us a review, or if you've got any questions, feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn at James Mulvaney. Thanks for watching, take care, and have a great day.